Davin, pleasure to have a chance to speak with you, especially because going into Black History Month, people are always looking for not just events to go to, but uh, being able to connect with Black heritage and what's going on with what you and your team is putting together. I think is something that's wonderful, and I think it exactly represents and what I am talking about right now. What is going on, and what have you been able to put together with your team?
I work with the Museum of Toronto. So we are a city museum, and the exhibition that we have put together is called Black Diaspora. So it's a oral archive of Black stories from across the GTA. We worked in collaboration with an organization called Afro Urban, and we basically the way the project came together, or the way the collection and the archive came together was with Afro Urban, basically the selection of 25 Black folks from across various demographics in the city. We invited these people to basically nominate two people within their communities that they wanted to interview. And so through those two interviews, we basically came up with it was 50 interviews, long form. We took those interviews. We then pulled out all of the various stories and curated an entire exhibition around these stories that really speak to, the movement, the trials, the tribulations, and celebrations of Black folks in Toronto.
Let's really put the extreme and why this is so important because I know for myself, growing up, um,
Mhm.
and having, how do let me even start from the beginning. When I was very young and living in Toronto, and my parents would have friends come over and they would all sit and talk about, you know, coming from the Caribbean. Yes, I said Caribbean, not Caribbean. Coming from the Caribbean and how they traveled to England, from England to Canada or the US, and all the things that they went through. It never occurred to me because I was busy playing with my friends, their kids. But somewhere in the back of my head, I was listening to what they were saying. As I've grown older, it's now when I come to realize those stories were extremely important, and we're losing the people who can tell those stories. Am I looking at the same way as this? Because that's why I feel like something like this is extremely, extremely important to document.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's a big part of it. Definitely resonate with your story there. My folks are from Guyana, and so the similar kind of idea. They come here in the late
Guyanese,
60s.
I got to interrupt.
Guyanese. Oh,
Guyanese,
wonderful. All
Georgetown.
right.
There we go.
Yeah, same Georgetown as well. My folks came up here in late 60s. Then went back to Guyana and then came back in the 70s. But even that, like back and forth. My mom came via England, but the same idea, and I think it's a common experience for not just Black folks, but immigrants that come to the city. That the idea of documenting these stories. It doesn't. I don't think at the time when people are doing this movement and doing this big journey to Canada, they're not thinking about, oh, this is something important that I'm doing. This should be documented. And unfortunately, you're right. These people are starting to get older now. These holders of these stories are starting to pass on. So I think it is imperative to be able to not only document but also celebrate. And I think for a lot of these folks who have made these trips, even their own self-recognition that their stories hold value to both community and I think city in general is very important. And I think that is definitely a big part of the impetus of this project.
Not to go off topic, but I've always said this when I hear people talking about, they had it tough and they had this and that. And I'm not saying they didn't have it tough. When I hear the stories of my parents and their friends going from Guyana to England on a ship for the amount of time they had to spend on this ship, what they ate, where they slept, and then going to England, as you just said, finding rooming, finding somewhere to live, finding out that these places, are very racist, and then having to come to Canada, to Toronto. I look at myself and go, I don't even know how, like, the amount of respect when you put that together is amazing to give them for what they endured for us to have the kind of life that we have here in this city. Again, these are some of the things I'm going to assume that we're going to hear. Can you talk about some of the stories that we're going to hear about?
Yeah, I think another thing I will mention is that, a lot of there was a lot of care and time taken into ensuring that these stories represented, not just Black folks from the Caribbean, but also, the stories of Black folks that came from Africa, Black stories, from East Africa, people that are more recent immigrants. And I think that's also where there's a lot of opportunity in this, is also seeing those parallels in more recent immigrants as well, and also just culturally. I mean, I think, my entry point to Blackness has always been through a West Indian Caribbean lens. And I think that, getting to appreciate, the stories of East Africans and Eritreans, and the totality and the fullness of the diasporic stories, is also a big part of the exhibition.
Okay, so let's look at this. I head over there. What happens? Where do I go? What do I
Yeah, so you
see? What
go
do I
in. So
hear?
the yeah, so sure. So our space is located at 401 Richmond, which is at Richmond and Spadina on the east entrance near Peter. When you walk in, you'll see an entrance to Black Diasporas. There's a bit of grounding there. We, kind of see the yeah, what went into this exhibition. And then you go through, and it's basically broken into a number of themes. So that's movement, building, faith, relationships, courage, and each of the stories have been categorized into these different themes, and then you can actually experience those through. So we have these beautiful wooden television boxes that have been created. People are invited to come in, get comfortable, and really listen to the various stories. You have stories of, people's stories of how they came to the city. The whole movement section is really interesting because the visual dynamic is actually, you actually see like a map of where these people, where they came from, how they got to Toronto, and every story is unique. There's parallels to various, people can see their parallels with their own stories. In addition to these various themes, there's a few really cool features in the exhibition. One of their interactives. So when you actually first do enter, you're asked to put a pin. There's a few different prompts, in a pin on the big map we have of the world, which is basically, where do you call home? Where were you born? And what areas do you have ties to? So that's been really interesting in itself. I mean, we even saw some pins in Asia and China, and so, I think there's the traditional stories that we think of. And then there's, just seeing visually, you're like, oh, there's some really interesting stories of just the people that are visiting the exhibition. In addition to that, there's a bunch of key dates, as a starting point of Blackness in this city, and really appreciating the fact that, I think one of the things when you look at that timeline is you recognize that Black people have been here, from time, like, going back into the early days, well before, the 60s and 70s, which is kind of what people tend to be more familiar with. One other feature I will say about the exhibition that is very exciting, we invited 10 filmmakers to come and review the archives and actually develop short films, using the oral narratives as their kind of as the backbone of the documentary of their piece. And then they went out and created visuals. Very interesting. We had multidisciplinary artists who made, very kind of abstract pieces. We had more accomplished traditional documentarians who made, very engaging documentary style pieces. We had one young man named Will Selves who did an AI piece, so it was all AI generated. So, it was also like a very interesting and beautiful thing to see, this, yeah, just like, again, taking this archive and being able to produce some additional, uh, visions of Blackness,
What
through the work that we've done.
what's the reaction been like? And especially because when I asked that, I'm talking about not just where folks are from, but ages. Has been the reaction? Because I can only imagine.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been beautiful. I mean, I think like you're saying correctly. I think there has been a lot of generational people coming with their parents, or people coming in and feeling seen, and seeing parallels between their stories, and hearing these various various oral histories. I think it's an incredibly dense exhibition. So again, if you're coming down, we do really encourage you to come and stay a while, and it's a lot to take in and process. And I think the exhibition was designed in such a way that it really does lend itself to people coming and kind of taking it in.
I'm just curious, did anybody mention about experiencing snow for the first time?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, come on, that's a given, right? No, absolutely. And yeah, I mean, even there's ones that that resonate, or that just hearing about that, you like, this one gentleman. Everybody is just first name, right? That
Yes.
took part in this, but this gentleman named Chris, he's in his 60s, Jamaican. Talks about coming here, and having a specific plan that he had, education wise, or he had a plan, but obviously he had to survive, and kind of his navigating of that. I think obviously the seeing of snow and that excitement, but then that starts to wear on you after a few after a few seasons. But then this gentleman worked on ended up working out or working in many. He was a builder, architect, or worked as a yeah is basically was working on a number of big projects in this city, that later he would see. He's like, oh, I worked on, I helped work on the CBC building in downtown Toronto, and stuff like that. And so you see these people who are contributing to the foundation of Toronto,
I'm
Um,
so glad to hear that, because it's like for me when driving on the Gardner, my dad would say he'd point to the breweries and stuff and saying, I
yeah,
helped build that, or pointing at the CN
yeah,
Tower and said, I helped put this together. I am so happy to hear that this is all now being documented.
yeah.
This so important. I'm just curious, is there any other events happening around this, or
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So we do have a number of programs that
yeah.
we're also running in conjunction with the exhibition. We are doing an archiving panel talk. That's actually happening in our space next Thursday, Thursday evening. I believe it's 6 to 8.
Mhm.
And then we also have a workshop about archiving. We're also doing a film screening the 12 films. Actually, some of the filmmakers actually made 2 films, and we will be having a panel discussion, kind of discussion about the whole process of making the films, and kind of their whole experience with that, some of the filmmakers. So yeah, definitely programs. We also have, I should also plug, a colleague of mine, and myself. We will be running curator tours this Saturday. We have some from we have two, one at 1 and one at 3 o'clock. And then we also have them, I believe it's February, one towards the end of February. I believe it is February. I think it's 22nd is when we have
Okay.
our last curator tour. So that's also a great experience to take it in with a group of folks, and we're able to give you a little more background of the whole exhibition.
Okay, fantastic. My friend, I gotta say thank you so much for this interview. But more importantly, man, from my family, thank you so much for having this. Because I've said this a million times that after hearing these stories and realizing the stories I've heard, it is so good to hear that it's being archived so
Yeah.
the younger generation can know what the older generation gave them, what they gave up to give them, because I think that is so, so, so important as we go on in a positive future. Thank you again for this interview, man, and thank you so much for putting this together.
Yeah. Thank you, Rudy. Take care.